In October, we witnessed another high and low in the Trump-Putin in relationship, with the pendulum swinging in favor of Ukraine eventually once again, albeit with no guarantees that this will last. Meanwhile, Russian pressure is not relenting on the battlefield, as very problematic situations for Ukraine are occurring in several sectors of the front simultaneously. Welcome to another update on the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Battlefield update, Pokrovsk, Mirnorad in the southern front. Let's start with Pokrovsk, which has been the primary target for Russia for more than 15 months now. Russians have reinforced the Pokrovsk sector with additional forces, ranging from 6,000 to 10,000 troops, according to different estimates. By early October, Russians had already established a presence in Pokrovsk proper, entering the city from the southwest. Throughout the month, they made considerable progress inside the city, reaching the E50 highway and turning the train station into a gray zone. It is important to note that Russians are using different methods of advance, which we talked about in several previous episodes. In previous major battles like Bakhmut, Avdiivka, and Toretsk, Russians regularly launched mechanized and tank assaults, non-stop infantry assaults to force Ukrainians out of their positions. This tactic has caused massive losses, both in manpower and equipment for the Russian army. Now they are taking advantage of the absence of continuous defensive lines for the Ukrainians by infiltrating their rear. And why doesn't Ukraine have continuous defensive lines? First, drones are changing the nature of warfare. Soldiers in trenches without proper cover are vulnerable to drone attacks. Any concentration of infantry can be visible to enemy drones. The second cause is also well documented. Ukraine's limited manpower enables these infiltration tactics to be effective. Russians send in small units of 5-10 men in dark hours, sometimes in civilian clothes, to avoid detection by drones. Once Russians are in their infiltration positions, they search for Ukrainian drone and artillery positions and give their coordinates to their own drone and artillery units. As soon as there are enough Russians to take over Ukrainian positions, they attack from several directions. This has allowed the Russian army to gain a significant foothold in Pokrovsk. In mid-October, Ukrainska Pravda newspaper reported that there were at least 250 Russian soldiers in Pokrovsk proper. This is not a considerable number at all, and they are scattered throughout different areas of Pokrovsk, which is assumed to be under Russian control. However, the Ukrainian manpower shortages apparently prevent them from dislodging even such Dnipropetrovsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson fronts under pressure. A relatively small force once they managed to infiltrate their rear. The Battle of Pokrovsk is still going on, and there are still Ukrainian soldiers in areas with Russian presence and in a gray zone. Moreover, on November 1, Ukrainian military intelligence forces landed in Pokrovsk to conduct counter-attacking operations. So, the tide may yet turn in Pokrovsk, but at this point, the situation is clearly in favor of the Russians. Heavy battles continue east of Pokrovsk as well. Russians have advanced on Mirnorad from several directions, with a particularly problematic situation developing due to a Russian advance from Novokonomich into the eastern part of Mirnorad proper and due to the capture of Krasny Lyman further north. The Russian General Staff claimed the encirclement of Ukrainian troops in Pokrovsk and Mirnorad, but as usual, they are exaggerating their successes. The Ukrainian army still has supply lines to its defenders. Having said that, the trend is not in favor of the Ukrainian army here either. Further to the north in the Dobrapilya sector, the back and forth between the two armies continues. So far, the Ukrainians appear to have an upper hand. They have pushed the Russians out of Kucherov Yar, Novoshakov, and Suvorov, while repulsing their attacks on Rodinsk. Meanwhile, Russians have made progress towards Nikanorovka and around Mayak. It is notable that after a very long interruption, Russia attempted its first large armored assault in this sector on October 9 towards Shakov, but Ukrainian drones prevented any meaningful progress for them, destroying dozens of tanks and armored vehicles. Further to the east, their primary target remains Kostiantynivka. Russians are fighting to approach this town from several directions, but they have achieved anything meaningful only around Oleksandro, Shultine to the south of Kostiantynivka. Somewhat overlooked due to the Battle of Pokrovsk, is the consistent Russian advance into Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. They have continued to make progress on the wide front between Novopavlivka and Huliaipol, meeting less resistance than elsewhere. In early October, the 141st Mechanized Brigade conducted a successful localized counterattack around Novoslivka, but this has not significantly slowed the general Russian advance on this front. In October, they advanced to Yahorovka, Vishnev, Pavlovka, and other settlements. The continued progress on this front would put additional pressure on Ukraine's defenses in Zaporizhia Oblast, which is getting tested by Russian assaults more and more often. In October, they conducted a mechanized assault on Sherbaki and Mali Sherbaki, but after initially gaining ground, they were thrown back by a Ukrainian counterattack. Russian officials and military bloggers have also been very vocal about their intentions towards Kherson in October, one of the more or less forgotten and cold fronts of this war, due to a massive obstacle between the sides, the river Dnipro. They are predicting an imminent attack on the right bank of Kherson, and the Russian army has reportedly captured Karantini Island, immediately south of the city of Kherson. But landing on the right bank, maintaining regular supplies to their troops there, and then making progress seems like a monumental task for either side at the moment. Ukrainians had made several attempts previously, but due to the difficulties mentioned previously, they failed to establish a permanent foothold on the left bank of the river. Kupiansk-Kharkiv border fights and Russian attrition in the Kupiansk sector. Battles are ongoing inside the city. In October, the Russian army gained some ground here, but Ukrainian resistance continues. Russians have advanced on the P-07 highway, the main supply line into Kupiansk proper and the Ukrainian bridgehead east of Oskil. Ukrainian units have tried to improve the situation by counterattacking to the north of Kupiansk, but so far it has not eliminated the threat of losing the city. Another problematic situation is developing in the border areas of Kharkiv Oblast. In our previous videos, we discussed the capture of Milov, located adjacent to the Russian border. At the time, it was not connected to the Russian bridgehead west of Oskil, so this was not a significant threat to Ukraine. But now they are fighting to take Otradny and Bolohivka, capturing which would allow the Russians easier access to the west of Oskil. So in the grand scheme of things, we are seeing more of the same. Russians hold the initiative on the battlefield. Although they lose a lot of men, they slowly advance. Mind you, not on the scale that may crumble the Ukrainian defenses, which the Kremlin propaganda wants you to believe in, and at a significant cost. On October 6, Casualties, Recruitment Crisis, and Evolving Russian Tactics, we saw a report of Ukraine's I Want to Live campaign, reflecting leaks of alleged Russian data on military casualties between January and August 2025, which claim that Russia has lost 281,550 soldiers in this period, 86,744 killed, including 1,583 officers, 33,996 missing, 158,529 wounded, including 6,536 officers, and 2,311 captured. While the authenticity of this data can be disputed, it aligns with Western estimates of Russian losses of around 25,000 to 35,000 per month. Such staggering losses are arguably the leading cause behind Russians rethinking their offensive tactics. The currently preferred infiltration tactics cause fewer casualties for Russia, which is admitted by the official casualty reports of the Ukrainian General Staff since August. This is all happening against the background of some moves the Russian government is taking about the further recruitment of soldiers. Possibly due to ongoing economic challenges, the Russian government reportedly continues to decrease the payments for people signing up to join the Russian army. And the decrease is drastic. For instance, it is reported that recruits from Samara Oblast used to be paid a signing bonus of roughly $38,000. Now they are getting less than $5,000. There are no new updates on the recruitment rate in Russia, and we do not know if drastically smaller payments have already caused a decrease in recruitment. What we know is that on October 13, the Kremlin approved a draft law allowing the Russian mobilization reserve to be deployed outside of Russia. This enables another route for recruitment to the Russian army without resorting to general mobilization, an unpopular decision that Putin would want to avoid for as long as possible. However, Russia's economic difficulties may ultimately compel it to do exactly that. Ukraine's long-range strikes against oil war and energy strikes ahead of winter. Russia's oil infrastructure certainly inflict further damage to its finances. In October, they continued their months-long campaign of targeting oil refineries. It is important to note that not all Ukrainian strikes lead to permanent destruction of the oil infrastructure, and often inflict only minor damage. However, even minor damage reduces the capacity of oil refineries and forces Russia to repair them, resulting in further time and financial losses, and this process is complicated by Western sanctions. According to the Russian media outlet RBK, as of September, Russia was facing a temporary 38% decrease in its oil refining capacity. What is perhaps even more impressive is that Ukraine manages to hit targets that are very distant. For instance, on October 7, they struck an oil refinery in Tyumen, a region roughly 2,000 km away, deep inside Siberia. But Russia also continues its drone and missile attacks on Ukraine. As winter approaches, Russia increasingly focuses on Ukraine's energy infrastructure. In October, a large number of such strikes were conducted, significantly damaging Ukraine's capacity to produce and deliver energy to households and industry. The main difference from similar campaigns of previous years is that this time, Russia targets the energy infrastructure in one oblast before switching to the next one. The result is that energy blackouts have become a regular occurrence in Ukraine. The Ukrainian government is attempting to mitigate this problem by establishing auxiliary networks of battery parks in undisclosed locations. Ukraine has survived 3 previous winter campaigns against its energy infrastructure, but the Russian attacks this winter may be more threatening. Trump, Putin, diplomacy, and Western military aid. Trump, diplomacy, foreign aid. The war rages on, following trends similar to the previous months. And our set of trends won't be complete without the chaotic diplomacy of Donald Trump. In recent weeks, Trump's moves and rhetoric were favorable to Ukraine. This continued into October as there were discussions and favorable public statements from the Trump administration officials regarding the delivery of Tomahawk missiles, which would significantly enhance Ukraine's long-range strike capability. Then Trump talked about the impending collapse of the Russian economy and mentioned Russian gasoline shortages, along with once again claiming that Russia has lost 1.5 million soldiers in the war. But on the eve of Zelensky's trip to Washington, Trump spoke on the phone with Putin, which planted some doubts in Trump's mind regarding Ukraine's prospects in this war. This becomes clear from the reports about the meeting between Trump and Zelensky a day later. Some media outlets claimed that the meeting was a shouting match, as Trump urged Zelensky to accept Putin's terms for a deal, warning that otherwise Russia would destroy Ukraine. And Putin's reported terms are similar to the ones stipulated earlier. He continues to demand complete control of Donbas, but this time in exchange he has promised some unspecified territories of the Kherson and Zaporizhia oblasts, knowing full well that this is a non-starter for Ukraine. Predictably, Zelensky rejected this offer. Whatever happened in the rest of the meeting, we do not know, but both sides came out of the meeting once again reiterating their previously agreed position on an immediate ceasefire along the current line of contact. On the other hand, for now, Trump rejected Ukrainian requests for Tomahawks, which was also something Putin publicly criticized and privately warned against in his phone call with Trump. However, soon after that, Trump announced that his planned meeting with Putin in Budapest was postponed, likely because Trump had once again concluded that Putin was not negotiating in good faith. Moreover, the United States took a significant anti-Russian step by imposing sanctions on Russian oil companies Rosneft and Lukoil, along with their subsidiaries. There are reports that, following this measure, Chinese and Indian oil companies reduced their direct purchases of oil from Russia. It is too early to suggest that this may become a long-term strategy for China and India, as their companies may be waiting for the dust to settle before resuming the purchase of Russian oil in large quantities. This is particularly true for China, which is now clearly and firmly on Russia's side in this war. However, it is worth monitoring this development as oil trade with China and India remains the most significant lifeline for Russia at a time when it is facing sanctions and experiencing increasing economic problems. And whereas Putin is trying to keep Trump on his good side, his steps against Europe are becoming more hostile. In September, Russian drones and jets started regularly violating the airspace of the EU and NATO countries. This continued in October as several incursions, causing disruptions to communication systems and the closure of airports, and reportedly surveilling military installations in Europe, were reported by European governments and media. If anything, such steps push Europe further towards Ukraine, even though European governments have not really taken concrete steps to prevent Russia from regularly violating its airspace. And although European support may be more substantial, as suggested by the Polish Prime Minister Tusk, it remains consistent, whereas at this point, we cannot say the same about the United States. Many of the aid pledges from Europe during this period were related to financing Ukraine's domestic production. For instance, in October, the Netherlands pledged €90 million for the production of drones. Norway committed $600 million for the production of drones and electronic warfare systems, and Canada promised $8 million for the production of interceptor drones, all to be manufactured in Ukraine. Another common trend is promises of aid to fight against Russia's never-ending drone onslaught. Ukraine needs affordable drone interceptors to counter this threat in a financially feasible manner. On October 8, the French military manufacturer Thales announced that it had developed and supplied Ukraine with an unspecified number of laser-guided rockets designed to counter drones. They plan to produce 10,000 such missiles per year. Britain also announced the delivery of hundreds of lightweight multirole missiles, which will also be used for air defense purposes. On October 24, the French President Macron stated his intention to deliver more Aster missiles and new Mirage jets, which are mainly used as an air defense asset in Ukraine, while the British Prime Minister Starmer pledged to accelerate the delivery of more than 5,000 multi-purpose missiles. The third most common foreign aid pledge is related to the prioritized Ukrainian requirements list Pearl initiative, wherein European countries finance military purchases from the United States. The NATO General Secretary Rutte announced that 17 NATO countries have pledged money within the framework of Pearl. According to Ukraine's Defense Minister S.H. Myhal during the October meeting in Ramstein, $422 million were allocated to Pearl, but much more will be needed in 2026 to cover Kyiv's needs. He mentioned a huge sum ranging from $12 to $20 billion, which Ukraine will need in 2026. Whether European countries will be ready to spend so much money against the backdrop of increasing domestic pressure from Eurosceptic, far-left and far-right parties opposing support for Ukraine is unknown. There have been several other notable pledges and deliveries, but perhaps no more critical than Zelensky's announcement that Sweden will deliver between 100 and 150 JS-39 Gripen fighter jets. Ukraine, they can carry long and medium-range air-to-air missiles, which can be helpful for both long-range strikes and medium-range combat. Gripens can be equipped with Meteor air-to-air missiles, suitable to counter Su-34's launching glide bombs, which have had a devastating impact on Ukraine's defenses in this war. Gripen's significant advantage over old F-16s is that it is cheaper to operate, easier to maintain, and it does not need well-maintained runways and airstrips to take off from. Conclusion, however, it will probably 4 years in. Ukraine's resistance and equipment losses take years before they are in sufficient numbers to make a genuine difference on the battlefield. For now, Ukraine continues to fight Russia with whatever resources it has. Obviously, it is a tough fight. Ukraine is struggling, and it is not always possible to stop the Russians from capturing territory. But it is essential not to lose sight of what virtually everyone expected to happen on the first day of the war. Instead of crumbling against the second biggest army in the world with tens of thousands of pieces of deadly military equipment within days, Ukraine is still standing strong for almost 4 years of this horrific war without losing a single regional center, and while significantly weakening Russia militarily and economically in the process. Let's conclude by looking at visually documented equipment losses suffered by both parties as of November 1. According to the data compiled by Oryx blog, Russia has lost at least 4,211 tanks, 10,431 vehicles, 306 command posts and communication stations, 2,224 artillery systems and vehicles, 168 aircraft and 166 helicopters. Ukraine has lost at least 1,316 tanks, 5,362 vehicles, 70 command posts and communication stations, 1,061 artillery systems and vehicles, 111 aircraft and 52 helicopters. Further updates on the Russian invasion of Ukraine are on the way. If you don't want to miss them, make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see it. Please consider liking, subscribing, commenting, and sharing. It helps immensely. Our patrons and YouTube members can watch more than 200 plus exclusive videos. Join their ranks via the link in the description or by pressing the join button under the video to watch these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord,